Hello, my name is Otso Lahtinen. This is the Deep End podcast, where we explore meaningful conversations to uncover insights that can improve quality of people's lives. Today is a very special day for me and a very special guest in the show. We've got Lord Anthony St. John all the way from London with close to 5 decades of experience in public life in heart of Britain, globally, and a remarkable business career, and also, I might add, a beautiful family. So it is an absolute great pleasure to have you here, my noble friend, Lord Anthony.
Well, thanks very much, Otso. Great to see you and lovely to be back in Dubai.
So how does Dubai seem now? It's like you said a moment ago that London is moving to Dubai.
Yeah, it's rather sad actually that so many of our friends are moving to Dubai and other parts of Europe and Monaco, but it's incredible, Dubai. I came here 20 years ago when it was just a concrete jungle. And now with all the golf courses and the clubs and the life and the soul, the city's got soul. And it's very refreshing to come here. And of course, this time of the year is wonderful because weather's great, it's not humid, and everyone's out and about. It's become a real family city, and I'm very impressed with what I've seen so far. I only arrived yesterday morning, so short and brief.
Yes. So why do you think so many people from Europe move over?
Look, I think we're going through a time of great uncertainty in the UK. London is one of the greatest cities in the world.
Yep.
It's been wonderful to have spent the last 40 years living in London and serving in the House of Lords. But I think at the time, people are looking at government in the UK with a little bit of fear and trepidation. It's not just necessarily on the industrial strategy. I think the industrial strategy is in fact very solid. They're looking for economic growth. But we had our budget this week.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as bad as everyone thought. Everyone had imagined it would be as bad as the last budget. But I think that families are moving here because they're realizing that they need to hedge their positions. We also have not had a happy experience post-Brexit.
Mm-hmm.
Brexit was, I think, a bit of a fudge. I think a lot of us who were in favor of reform of the Maastricht Treaty, a lot of us who had looked at the benefits of Brexit, in fact, have been bitterly disappointed. We were promised a lot and we have not had any delivery. That said, I am a European, and when it comes to the reason for leaving London right now, I think one of the main reasons why people are leaving is because of the inheritance tax.
Right.
To have 40% inheritance tax, having paid 45% ordinary tax, the double taxation, and people are saying, hold on, your budget is 1.25 trillion. If you're running a private business and you're having financial difficulties, you go to your finance director and you cut your capex and you cut your opex. There's no evidence of them cutting costs. I'll just give you one little example. 434 billion pounds is spent annually on procurement.
Mm-hmm.
That's procurement of goods and services. And obviously, if you've got an AI wrapper, you could make substantial savings.
Yes.
Our black hole is about 100 billion. But what we're doing in the UK is we're doubly taxing. And there's a lot of people who are questioning government. So I'm very much in favor of a democracy, but I don't think the people have much say in the way the policy is run. Government should be very receptive to individuals' plight.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously we have a lot of those who are concerned about the National Health Service,
Yes.
about the welfare state. But a lot of people are concerned about immigration. A lot of people are concerned about paying too high tax. A lot of people are concerned that crime is not being improved. A lot of people are concerned that the UK is rudderless. Now, I'm an independent. I'm not Conservative. I'm not Labour. I'm not Liberal Democrat. I'm strictly independent. And I think a lot of the woes that this government are facing are as an aftermath of mismanagement by the previous government. The previous government, I think, lost its way. But I came to the UK, if I could rather preempt the situation, I came to the UK in 1979. 1979 was an incredible year because this was when Margaret Thatcher came to the UK. I arrived in the House of Lords 2 months before Maggie Thatcher became Prime Minister. And the UK was in terrible turmoil. And she changed that country around. She brought back that sense of pride, that sense of real wanting to work hard, play hard, that sense of pride in ownership, the sense that you didn't have to worry about the trade unions. She took on Arthur Scargill. But in the UK at the moment, Keir Starmer, he's a jolly nice chap. He's deservedly the Prime Minister. But no one really knows what he stands for. And whilst he deserves to be the Prime Minister, and whilst the Labour Party were rightly elected, I think right now what we need to see in the UK is cohesion. Margaret Thatcher brought in cohesion. So did Tony Blair bring in cohesion. I don't see that cohesion in the UK right now. And
Can I ask? So in that 78, 79, did it look as gloomy as it does today?
Absolutely. It looked very, very gloomy. This was after the Michael Foot days. This is the time with the unions. We were talking about 4-day working weeks. This is the time that the economy was in complete disarray. This is the time when everyone was looking to leave the UK. So I think that there will be a time, hopefully, when those will want to go back to the UK. We've got a great education system.
Sure.
We've got a great legal system. We've got one of the most established stock markets in the world. It's a fabulous, vibrant place. But at the moment, a lot of people are leaving. If I leave, it will be for different reasons. I'm 68. I was brought up in Africa. I miss Africa. I want to spend more time in Africa. I want to spend some time possibly going on the speaking circuit in the US. I want to spend more time with my family. And I want to spend more time, so it wouldn't be a tax decision, it would be a lifestyle decision as far as I'm concerned. But who knows? I just think at the moment it's sad that we've lost, my wife and I, so many of our very dear friends who are living in other jurisdictions. And I think the government should look at these numbers and reflect. And I remember having a conversation with Tony Blair about the non-doms. And he, in fact, believed the non-doms were an asset to the UK. It's not necessarily in terms of just the taxes, it's the invisible earnings. They support the charities, they support the arts, they support the job market, they support the restaurants. They support so much of the UK economy in terms of invisible earnings. And in a way, you're getting rid of the golden egg. And I think that's a great shame. And things need to happen fast to reverse that trend.
So on that, how did Margaret Thatcher then make it cohesive and make it work in a better way back in the 70s?
Well, Margaret Thatcher did many things.
Yeah.
Of course, she took on the unions, she lifted exchange controls, she made it a much more market-driven economy. Funny enough, a lot of politicians worry about what the media say about her, about them. They're always looking over their shoulder. Margaret Thatcher had Sir Bernard Ingham. He was an extraordinary man. He was her press secretary. And he used to read the newspapers for her. He used to basically tell her, Prime Minister, this is what you should be aware of. This is what you should not be aware of. And I think that so she had her own way of running the show. And it leads on to a different question, and that is that one of the best run governments, is the Singapore government, because it's essentially business people running government. And government should be seen as a business. It should be seen being responsible for your shareholders. Your shareholders are your electorate. It should have people in positions who know their portfolios. Problem with politics today is that they do government reshuffles, whereas one person can be education secretary today, they can be doing a totally different portfolio in another way. It's about relationship building. It's about building trust. It's about integrity. It's about accountability.
Would you say that, because obviously Donald Trump comes from business, does his governance then represent a better way of doing it because he comes from business? Does that have an impact on
Donald
the
Trump
performance?
is unique. He's unique. I don't know any politician who has come in the way that Donald Trump has come. You know, whether you like him, whether you have reservations about him, his style is effective. His style is effective in what he's done in terms of his foreign affairs. I don't believe what he's doing in terms of the trade wars is a good thing. I think it is divisive. I think in a world where we have massive problems on climate change, we have massive problems on the war between, obviously, Ukraine and Russia. We have issues on unemployment. We have issues on so many challenges. I think the world ought to be coming together to challenge. And I think he tends to be quite divisive. So he has been effective, but he's also been deeply divisive. And many would say that he's out for short-term gain and long-term pain. I was just yesterday speaking about the difference between the Chinese approach and the US approach. Chinese play the long game.
Yes.
The leadership in the US seem to be playing the short game. Now, I'm not being critical. I'm making an observation.
So how do you think then Britain could get back on track? Obviously, those principles that Maggie Thatcher implemented, some of them are not relevant to today's day, but some of them might be. One of the things that seems to be challenging all over Europe and UK compared to US, for instance, economically, is the lack of the big tech companies. So is that, do you think if we could get more big tech companies in the UK, that would get some more momentum going and perhaps the gloominess would lift ultimately?
Look, I can answer that in different ways. I
Sure.
can answer that from a political point of view. I can answer that from a business point of view. And I can answer that from a futuristic point of view.
Yes.
Let's look at it from a political point of view. In June this year, the government came up with an industrial strategy.
Yes.
The industrial strategy was the blueprint for how they wanted to drive growth, of how they wanted to bring investment into Britain, of how they wanted to make the most of the science and really creativity that the UK has to offer. The UK has some of the greatest scientists in the world. There's been no follow-through. Now, I run audit and risk departments in the companies that I serve as chairman, as a director, and I run HR departments. You've got to set a scorecard. You've got to have a set KPIs. You've got to set firm directions. There's been no follow-through from the industrial strategy. There's just been platitudes. Politicians have got to stop worrying about the next general election, and they've got to get on with running the business. And the business is delivering on the manifesto commitments that they give. And that's one thing I will say about Trump. Donald Trump made certain pre-election promises, and he has fulfilled many of those in a very short amount of time.
Sure.
His way of doing so has been rather draconian, but I think that the moment that the Labour government in Britain has not fulfilled its promises to the electorate in the way that they should have done, they should be running it like a business. Now let's look at your second question, and that is about the technology companies. If you're a technology company and you're coming to the UK, you're going to want to have the infrastructure. You want to have the skill sets. You want to have the tax incentives. You want to have that ability to understand how they can do what they want to do in a free market economy. At the moment, as far as I'm concerned, the UK is very risk averse in terms of the institutional investors and private equity. The UK has great science parks, but so much of the time the UK is good at creating the ideas, but not financing it
Mm-hmm.
and taking it through to becoming profitable. That's why the UK has so few unicorns compared to those in the US. Now, that's not to say that there's not the opportunity to do so. Ireland, for example, has been hugely beneficial. They brought their corporation tax down to 12%. They've made the whole environment much more conducive and user-friendly for technology companies to come. That's why Microsoft and others have gone there. But I think the UK needs to listen rather than to advocate. Now, that might be an unfair comment to make. We have trade envoys. We have ways in which we market ourselves in the UK to other economies. But I think that we're not doing enough to market ourselves sufficiently to the technology companies to make it attractive for them to want to stay in the UK. And I think that's what Margaret Thatcher did. She made it attractive. She followed through. And that's why we had that boom period after that. We also had the boom period after Tony Blair. So it's not necessarily whether you're conservative or whether you're Labour. It's setting the environment so it's user-friendly and that you have that sense of, yes, we're doing the right thing. We're behind you. The UK right now is deeply divided, and that's sad.
How did Maggie Thatcher create the shared feeling? Was there some kind of scheme or some kind of project that she instilled to bring people together and feel the pride of ownership of the country?
She was a great, strong leader.
Right.
I should say to you, why do you think she became called the Iron Lady? Because she had stealth, she had charisma, and she had a great team around her.
Yes.
Now, let me give you an example. I love sport, and I love the game of rugby. And Nelson Mandela, when he came out of prison, one of the first things he did was he backed the Springbok rugby team. And he said the Springbok rugby team should represent people from all different disciplines in the country. They became the World Cup champions. That wasn't because they were the biggest or the fastest or the most talented. It's because they worked as a cohesive team. That's what I think is lacking in Britain today. We're too divided. We need to work as a cohesive team. Maggie was a leader. Tony Blair was a leader. They got the team behind them and they said, that's where we want to go. And they got there.
And Mandela was a leader too. I mean, because there has been as far as I understand, there was a bubbling desire to create the country into democracy and end apartheid for decades. And he was the sort of symbol of that from within, from prison. And once he got out of prison, he became a president. So then obviously, this probably has to do with the rugby success as well. The players wanted to show up for him and everybody wanted to show up and the country wanted to become united because it's such a powerful example to be in prison for 27 years and not like lose yourself basically and then forgive to everybody. But that's not like available in today's UK. So what do you think needs a new government or like next election, or how do you think this type of strong leadership can emerge? And it's not only necessarily UK, because a lot of Western countries have similar seeming issue. So since this type of like huge, massive movement that isn't seemingly available, what sort of means do we have within the normal politics to create
Look, I think that's a great question. Let me talk about Nelson Mandela for a second.
Sure.
We called him Madiba.
Right.
Means father figure. Madiba, after 27 years of incarceration, came out not, as many might have imagined, with a vindictive mindset, but promoted peace and reconciliation, promoted unity, promoted the rainbow nation, promoted a world where they had a joint vision about what they could achieve together. In the UK right now, we're deeply divided.
Right.
We have Nigel Farage of the Reform Group, who's actually not really a politician, but he is almost speaking on behalf of the people. He speaks on behalf of the frustration that people feel on immigration, lack of delivery on Brexit, the whole taxation system.
Yep.
He is one of the protest votes. Now, whether Nigel Farage is the man who will lead Britain into the next election, if you believe the newspapers and the opinion polls, you will think he's a shoo-in for the next election. But a lot can happen. The next election will be in 4 years' time. And there will not be an election until that full 5-year term has elapsed. There will not be a situation where turkeys vote for Christmas,
Yes.
where they say enough is enough, let's call another election. That's not going to happen. But we need strong, cohesive leadership. Now, in the run-up to this election, to this budget now, there was talk in the media of there possibly being a leadership challenge in Labour.
Yes.
I don't think there will be a leadership challenge. And if there is, I think Keir Starmer will survive. But that's me. I'm giving a subjective opinion. I don't think he's been given the opportunity yet to really make the most of his premiership.
Mm-hmm.
But he needs to be divisive. He's been very successful in foreign affairs, but domestically he's been weak and rudderless. We need to see that sense of let's get on with it, let's get across the line, let's do it together. At the moment, the right hand is not speaking to the left hand.
One of the things that I've heard often from you is you are in this world for good time, not for a long time. Would you like to, what does that give you? What do you make of that? Why do you say it so often?
I think it's a wonderful expression. I, unfortunately, am the 22nd St. John of Bletso. Only 4, to my knowledge, of the St. Johns of Bletso have lived beyond the age of 60.
Wow.
I had 4 stents in my heart when I was 55. I got hit by a car on my way to Parliament on my motorbike on the 22nd of October 2022. I was diagnosed with lung cancer this year. I've had a lot of things that have happened in my life which could have turned me to becoming depressed and saying, time up. But in fact, it's made me more determined to make the most, to forge forward. So since I've had stents in my heart, I don't have heart problems. Since I had my motorbike accident, I've had to fight back, but now I'm absolutely fine. I found out early that I had lung cancer. I don't need chemotherapy or radiotherapy. I am cured of cancer. But I think you've got to have that sense of, there's a wonderful Swahili expression, it's Hakuna Matata. And this Hakuna Matata means no worries.
Yeah.
I just think you need to have a mission statement. That's what I want to see in government. And my greatest, there's 4 years of my life, which are really significant years
Yes.
of my life. I'll tell you what they were. They were on the 11th of February of 1978, when my dad suddenly had an aneurysm, 59, died in his sleep, changed my life. When that happened at the time, I was basically a surfer. I loved Cape Town. Barbecues, braais as we call it out. They used to have barbecues and had a good time. I used to chase girls, obviously always enjoyed that part of life, had a carefree life. Then suddenly I lost an icon, a father who I adored. But it made me realize that I had a responsibility. It was a privilege, I had a responsibility. The other big year was in 1989. That was the year that we had glasnost and perestroika with President Gorbachev. We had the situation of Helmut Kohl, the Berlin Wall coming down. We had President F.W. de Klerk saying it's time up for the apartheid regime. It's time to get into negotiations to release Nelson Mandela. It was effectively the end of the Cold War. That was an incredibly important time it was a turning point. We then had, of course, just after the stock exchange, after the stock market crash, I got married for the first time. I was aged 36 and I'm an only child, and within 5 years, I had 4 children, blessed with 4 children. It's been the greatest privilege and honor and delight to have 4 children. But those years of having children, one after the next, those were the most meaningful times of your life, because when you don't have children, you tend to be quite selfish. Your life is all about you. When you have children, it's about sharing your life, about working for them. And the excitement and the joy of having them at this rate is just incredible. And then more recently, the challenges that I've had to face with breaking my back, diagnosis of cancer. Those have been times of huge change where you've got to recalibrate. Now, I'm saying these dates to you because everyone worries that politics is not going to change. We are in a transitional time at the moment. And if you look back, I was born in 1957. I was born when the Sputnik, the Russians, sent the first satellite into space. That was the start of the internet. And the world population has grown substantially. I was asked just yesterday, do you think the United Nations and the World Bank and the World Trade Organization are out of date? Well, if you look at the United Nations and you look at the World Bank, they were created after the World War. The population of the world was only 2.5 billion people. We're 8.3 billion people today. And I think the world is changing at an incredible pace. And that's why when I say you're on this world for a good time and not a long time, I think it's important that you look at your short-term priorities, your medium-term priorities, and your legacy. And I'm constantly looking at my legacy, which is through my children, and trying to bring about positive change. And that should be the attitude of government. Government should not just be worried about winning the next election. They should be concerned about what legacy they're going to leave for future generations.
There is a statement that if you want to understand behavior, you got to look at the incentives. I think Elon Musk says that a lot. I find it to be true in all areas of life. In politics, the incentive in democracies is to win the election and to be re-elected. So since the incentive is that and the term is limited, how can this challenge be fixed without changing the structure? I mean, I know it's a broad question, but just as reflection.
Look, just as a director or a chairman, if he doesn't achieve his numbers or her numbers, let's not be sexist, gets chucked up by the shareholders, governments are responsible for the electorate. Many governments in the world don't respect the 5-year rule. We can mention several countries in Africa where presidents have been in power for 20, 30, if not 40 years. That is totally unacceptable. But if you want to win an election, you've got to have a scorecard. And if you achieve your scorecard, you will be re-elected. If you lose your way along the way, you should be chucked out. And I think now we're entering into a much different environment. We're in a digital world. In the old times, it was a case of going to the voting roll and putting in your vote. And we didn't have all the social media and all the way that the internet and AI have changed our lives. But I think we've got to look to try and get the electorate more engaged in casting their vote. I think there's been a lot of voter apathy. Now, I'm going beyond your question. As you might realize, when you're in politics and you're asked a question, you don't know the answer. You answer it in a way that you want to make your point of view known. So, I've actually almost forgotten the question you just asked me, but I'm going to try and tell you that accountability and transparency and governance are vitally important.
Right.
Vitally important in running a business, vitally important in running a government. And I think trust and integrity goes across both. If you don't trust your chairman and your chief executive, you chuck them out. If you don't trust your prime minister, you don't trust your government, you chuck them out. Except in a private organization, if you have enough shares, you can chuck them out within a matter of weeks or months, and you call an EGM or an AGM. In a government, it takes 5 years to get rid of them. So this government have got a lot to do to rebuild confidence. If we look at see what's been happening here in Dubai, why is Dubai so exciting? It's exciting because Maktoum and the royal family have done an incredible job here. They had a vision and they've fulfilled their vision. They've done incredible things and they're adjusting to change. They're adapting and they're making it exciting. And I think that is what is the reason why many are coming here. They're inspired. They see no crime. They see low taxation. They see economic growth. They see incentives for small and medium-sized enterprises. They have one of the greatest airports in the world. A friend of mine I spoke to this morning said he's going off the Maldives. Maldives, 2.5 hours away.
Oh, it's right there.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's on your doorstep. You know, if you have the vision, you can achieve the dream. If you don't have the vision, you're basically looking over your shoulder. And that's the problem in Britain today. We're not a cohesive team. We need to recalibrate. We need to move forward. Now, I say this as one who's leaving the House of Lords. I don't deserve to be in the House of Lords. I got in the House of Lords by a fluke of sperm because my father was a peer. I became a peer. I chose to go into the House of Lords because I had a mission statement. My mission statement was I didn't agree with apartheid. I didn't agree with the fact that Nelson Mandela was incarcerated. And I wanted to raise the voice of the youth of South Africa saying apartheid is not acceptable. We need to have Madiba released. We need to work to get a cohesive nation. We need to work for a future. I never had any idea that I would stay in the House of Lords and 47 years later still be there. I got elected when they reformed the House of Lords. When Tony Blair rightly got rid of hereditary peers, he kept a certain number. And now the Labour Party are finishing off their manifesto commitment to get rid of the remaining hereditary peers. I personally think it's the wrong policy. I think they need hereditary peers. I think the House of Lords needs that experience between politicians who are obviously career politicians and those who come from a farming background, coming from different countries, a multidisciplinary skill set. They're going to lose that by getting rid of the remaining hereditary peers. Now, talking for myself, I've accepted that it's time for me to move on to newer pastures. But I think that Lord's reform is there because it's fulfilling a commitment to the so-called electorate, the far left. And they don't know anything about what the House of Lords does. And we can perhaps discuss a little bit about the role of the House of Lords.
That would be very
explain
interesting.
a bit more.
Yeah. Could you help me understand what is the role of House?
Well, I do a little bit of outreach work. So I go to schools. I
Yeah.
take tours around Parliament. And a kid asked me the other day, so I think rather cheekily, he said, so you have 650 members of the House of Commons. You have almost 1,000 members of the House of Lords. The House of Commons are elected every 5 years. You guys aren't elected. What justifies your role to sit in the House of Lords? And I said, look, that's a perfectly good question. But what you should understand is the House of Commons is all about initiating legislation and winning votes. The House of Lords is about revising and examining and winning arguments. And there's a big difference between winning arguments and winning votes. And what the House of Lords has, it has this eclectic mix of doctors, lawyers, accountants, sports people, musicians, people who come from every eclectic background. And whatever subject we're debating, there is expertise in the House. It's not a political organization where people vote according to their party. They vote more on the arguments. And therefore, the House of Lords has an incredibly important role to play as being a revising chamber. But I think the most important role of the House of Lords is their work in select committees. Do you know much about the select committees? The select committees are really small groups that discuss reform of education, housing, healthcare. I've just come off the select committee on space. In fact, I've got the report in front of me here. The space economy, act now or lose out. Fascinating. This is the work which the House of Lords does really well. The select committees where you have think tanks which go through important reforms. And it's a result of these think tanks, these select committees, that are the nucleus for change in policy. So just as a company needs to have days when I call them strategy days, days off campus to strategize, what the House of Lords has, they have these select committees that work for anything between 3 to 6 months and produce these incredible reports. Now, the House of Lords doesn't get paid a salary. The House of Commons gets a salary. The House of Lords gets an expense allowance. And frankly, it's a derisory expense allowance. I'm a lawyer. As lawyers sell their time in terms of time, 500 hours to £1,000, £500 to £1,000 an hour, same as investment bankers. But you get a derisory expense allowance. That's not the reason why members come to the House of Lords. They come to the House of Lords and not for their expenses, not for the privileges of the wonderful facilities of Parliament. They come because they have a purpose, and that purpose is to serve the nation. And in serving the nation, that is serving in all-party parliamentary groups, serving in select committees, voting, taking part in taking special interest groups, petitioning on behalf of others. And one of the things I should mention to you, which is not often known, we have a register of interests. And the register of interests says, who do you work for? Who pays you what? So we are completely accountable. We cannot, for example, you come from an engineering background. You can't come to me and say, look, there's a little bill coming through Parliament. Will you go and lobby for me? That's handcuffs if I do something like that. You have to declare absolutely everything. You are fully accountable, you are fully transparent, and that's a good thing. And I think that one of the things that I take exception, which I don't like, I'm referred to as a PEP, a politically exposed person. If you're a PEP, every bank hates you.
Nightmare at the bank, I can imagine.
I can tell you, I'm 68, I'm trying to remortgage at the moment. They're saying, you're a PEP, you're 68, you shouldn't be remortgaging, you should be retiring at the age of 68. The robot says no. And it's unfair. We shouldn't be referred to as PEPs. We should be working, we are glorified extensions of the civil service. We give our time because we're passionate about the cause. So again, I haven't answered your question properly, but the role of the House of Lords is to revise and examine. It is not elected. It's there to improve legislation, not to block legislation. It has the right to delay legislation for up to a year. And we have the Salisbury Convention. I won't get into all the different conventions of Parliament, but what I will say is that Parliament's role in a unicameral legislature would be a disaster. In a bicameral legislature, it provides the checks and balances. And even though there are many who are clamouring for reform of the House of Lords, as many are clamouring for reform of the royal family.
Sure.
There's a lot of credence. I'm a royalist, by the way. Let me make it very, very clear. I had the privilege of serving as extra Lord in Waiting to Her Majesty the Queen from 1998 until she sadly passed on in 2022. What an incredible lady she was. And I'm now serving from 1979 until next year when I'll be stepping down and moving on. It's been a privilege, it's been an honour. And that's why I think the House of Lords has an incredible future ahead of it, as long as they don't tinker at the edges. And I think the royal family are vitally important for Britain today.
Using a company analogy, it sounds like advisory board on steroids.
Yeah, it is. It is.
For the House of Commons, it's a huge resource for the government if understood and used correctly.
The difference in a director and being an advisor is as a director, you're accountable. You can get sued if you don't perform. As an advisor, you're not sued. The same thing applies. The House of Lords, you are serving as an advisor for a derisory amount of money. You don't look at it from a money point of view. If you don't serve your constituents as an MP, you get chucked out.
Interesting. So you are a crossbencher. Does it mean that you are not a Tory, you are not a Labour, so you can speak whatever you really think? Is that correct?
I'm strictly independent.
Right.
I don't align. I vote as much for the government as I vote for the opposition. I don't vote very much. I vote most of the time when I listen to the debates. A lot of the time, and here I am being critical of my colleagues, peers go through the division lobbies not having a clue what the division is all about. You rarely ought to. There ought to be a way of being able to say, do you know what you're voting for? Because you need to be understand. Now, as an independent, I'm strictly independent. I am petitioned and basically canvassed on lots of different issues. I decide for myself. I like to be the master of my own destiny. Now, that's not to say that there are many advantages to being a crossbencher. If you're a member of a party, you get obviously the party whips, the party meetings to help. We have a tremendous crossbench convener, as in Lord Canute, Charles. He's absolutely fantastic. He keeps us up to date, but we operate strictly as independent members, not as a caucus. So we don't have to vote. We vote when we want to vote. It's an ideal situation. For me, I will always be a crossbencher.
Does it mean that if there is like a very tight vote and Tories and Labour is head to head, that crossbenchers can tilt it one way or the other?
The crossbenchers make up 18% of the vote of the House. I speak under correction. I think it's 18%. So we represent a large number. And if the crossbenchers and the Liberal Democrats vote with an amendment, that amendment will be passed.
Right. So how did you become a crossbencher?
I decided myself.
Okay, so it's a choice when
Yeah.
you join.
Yeah.
Right.
My father never took his seat in the House of Lords.
Okay.
And my father, the reason why he never took his seat is my father had a very bad stutter. And I had a very bad stutter. And I overcame my stutter when I came to the Lords. But I never knew you could overcome my stutter. You know, when I came, when you take your seat, you've got to swear your oath of allegiance. And you've got to say, I, Anthony Tudor, Lord St. John of Bletso, do solemnly swear to be true and faithful to the Queen, her successors and heirs. Well, I couldn't say the words F, M, R, S, B, and W. So you can imagine I made a complete Horlicks. And I remember coming back to my seat, and I was 22 years old, and I had long hair, and I was kind of a little bit of a rebel, and a little note came across the floor, and it said the words, "Welcome to the Lords. Great to have some young blood. Fancy join me for tea, yours ever, Hume." And I didn't know who this was, and I looked around the chamber, and there was no one looking at me. And then I asked the Blackrod official, and I was saying to the Blackrod official, tell me who is the dude? He said that the dude is Alec Douglas Hume, and he was the Prime Minister in 1962. And Alec took me for tea. He told me that he knew my father. My father went to Wellington School, and he sent me to a speech therapist. I remember going to see this wonderful lady. Her name was Sharon Levy in Kingsway. And after 6 months, I was doing, have you seen the film The King's Speech? You know, you do all these exercises with your fingers, and you do that, and you breathe, and you do all these exercises. I did all of that. And after 6 months, I was able to look. Before, if you and I were having an interview when I had my stutter, I'd be crossing my arms and I'd be looking like this. I would never make eye contact. I now make eye contact. I use my arms.
Yeah.
So that was one of the reasons what, for me, changed my life, because of my not being able to talk properly, and it helped me. But again, I haven't answered your question. I've gone off-piste, as they say in the skiing parlance. But no, the Lords has been an incredible honour, an incredible privilege. It carries responsibilities, and it's something not to be abused, but it should be fully accountable, just as the House of Commons.
How did your father prepare you to becoming a Lord in Parliament?
He didn't. My father had no idea that he would die at the age of 59. My father and I were very close. He was a stockbroker. When I knew that I would become Lord St. John as a youngster, we never spoke about it, because he didn't want to change me. He wanted me to just be the kind of the normal guy, you know, in Cape Town, just carrying on. I think some people, when they have titles, they abuse their titles. They kind of use it for commercial gain, personal gain. My father was a very humble person. My father never said a bad word about anybody, and he would never have wanted me to refer to myself by my title. I much prefer, by the way, being called Anthony. I don't like being called Lord St. John. My father was very much that very strictly principled person. He believed in the goodness of people. And the one way he did prepare me was to never think badly about people. Always look at the good sides. Never prejudice between age or sex or religion. Just everyone is on this world, add in the same. My father didn't approve of apartheid, very opposed to apartheid. So he always hoped that one day I would go out and I would petition for the cause, which would be the end of apartheid. but he wasn't forceful. He was humble. He was a stockbroker. He worked for the Bank of England when he worked in England. He met my mother on a kind of a arranged date, and he didn't want to come to South Africa. They made a deal. They lived in Lennox Gardens, which is our family home. And my mum was older. He was 1 year older than my father, and they made a deal that if they had a child, they'd move to South Africa, and that's why I went there on the Union Castle line when I was 3 months old. So my father loved South Africa, but he never really, sadly, used his position, because I think he had a lot to say, but he couldn't say it because of his stutter.
When did you first hear of Nelson Mandela as a child? Do you remember?
I knew Nelson Mandela from the time that I was first able to read and write. I always had this curiosity about the man. In the deep days of the apartheid regime, he was made out to be a bad man, a man who was a terrorist, a man who was all these things. He was given really bad rap by the apartheid regime. I always had a curiosity about Nelson Mandela. I always wanted to know more about this man. I just felt it was completely wrong and immoral that you'd have railway lines where you'd have the first 6 carriages for whites only and the next 6 carriages for they call them non-whites.
It's crazy.
And it was just balmy. You have to go to liquor stores. You'd have whites only, non-whites. You'd have a situation where I lived in a little village called Cork Bay, which is a fishing village. We didn't have discrimination in Cork Bay, whites, blacks, coloureds. We all sat together in the same fishing village. But then you had areas where you had the townships. You had, the non-whites, the blacks having to come into town with a pass. It's your country. How do you have to have a pass? So it was just an extraordinary time. So for me, when I became becoming a teenager, and I was living with all these principles and speaking to my father. My mum wasn't political. My mum just loved horse riding and loved the enjoyment of the Cape. But my dad was deeply principled, and we had many discussions about why Mandela was so pivotally important, and the whole Sharpeville history. And there was this wonderful man called Peter Hain, Lord Hain, now a great friend of mine. And he was petitioning for sanctions against sporting sanctions. One thing about South Africans love sport. It isn't just rugby. They love their cricket. They love everything about sport. And the one thing that really hurt them was not being able to play sport internationally. And I think sporting sanctions made a big difference in getting the South Africans to say, we want to join the international fold. Often sanctions, you look at the sanctions against Russia at the moment, sanctions don't always work. You've got to make sanctions work so it really hurts the people. It really hurts the leaders. Sporting sanctions really hurted South Africa. Peter did a great job in sporting sanctions. But Mandela, for me, I met Mandela first when he was actually in prison.
Wow.
And I met him, and I was there when he was released. I was there, he was in an open prison at the gate. I was there when Winnie and held
when
hands.
He walked out.
He walked to freedom, when he punched the air.
Wow, that's amazing.
Great times,
yes.
Memorable times. But I think that South Africa has been living. If you just think of my life now, lived through pre-apartheid, post-apartheid, and now in this whole digital revolution. Let's start talking about the digital revolution.
Let's.
Let me actually start by preempting the conversation. I sat in the select committee on artificial intelligence and machine learning, where our Lord Chairman was Lord Clement Jones. I knew very little about artificial intelligence. In those days, we were talking about the importance of data, about privacy. We had no idea in 2017 that there would be this digital revolution. We'd seen, obviously, the internet changing our lives, Google, and all of the changes. We'd seen, obviously, Jeff Bezos with Amazon. We'd seen how the internet had changed the world. But we had no idea that there'd be a thing called ChatGPT. We'd had no idea that you'd have this incredible time when NVIDIA, the semiconductor chips, if I'd bought NVIDIA shares in 2018, I'd be sitting on a yacht somewhere in the Dubai Marina right now. It was extraordinary to see that mushrooming explosion of interest in data. And I think that having been in this tidal wave, we're now faced with huge opportunities. We also faced, and I'm wearing my House of Lords hat on here,
Yes.
with huge challenges. Because we were talking about narrow intelligence. We're now moving rapidly to general intelligence. We've got to move to get guardrails. And that's why when you're talking about the relationship between China and America, we've got to have joined up thinking about how can we tackle fake news? How can we tackle some of the negative aspects of AI? How can we de-risk the model? It's fantastic. It's the most, I use it the whole time. I use more agentic than AI, but it's an opportunity and it's also a risk.
So by 2030, which sector do you think AI will have transformed the most?
Health tech.
How so?
Do you know, and this is a strange statistic, the market capitalization of NVIDIA is over 5 billion. The market capitalization of every single health business, health tech, everything, Glaxo, Pfizer, Novartis, Amgen, you look at all the pharmaceutical companies, pull them all together, market cap 4.4 billion.
Trillion.
4.4 trillion, trillion, not billion. I'd buy them off if I had the money. No, 4.3 trillion, the market cap of NVIDIA, 5 trillion.
Right.
It's just the extent to which you will be able, with data, to create a digital twin, to create with your health data, your bloods, to be able to be proactive in managing your health. You won't need to have doctors the whole time. You'll be able to, a lot of the time, people are going to the NHS for ailments that they could quite easily get sorted out without going to their GP practice and wasting time. GPs should be there to sort out serious cases, not sort out cases that can be sorted out over the internet. In many parts of the developing world, where the mobile telephone is more important than a wallet, the mobile telephone, if you can get extendable battery life, and particularly now with having internet access, vitally important. Talk about broadband and Elon Musk and the importance of Starlink. But Starlink and giving people broadband is opening an opportunity for us to, with the data that we're getting and data analytics, to use AI to provide solutions and knowledge which we wouldn't have had in the past. And I think that's going to be revolutionary and a force for good.
So one of the things in the Select Committee AI report, one of the recommendations was to ensure ethical AI, bias mitigation, fairness, model explanations, verification, and testing frameworks. So to essentially build it in a way that it has healthy values, if I understand. Is there, what kind of action is being taken right now that you see?
I'm pleased you read the report. Well done.
Thank you.
The importance of language models is to try and avoid bias, is to try and constantly improve, but also to have guardrails. And I don't think there's sufficient guardrails. The tendency in technology is to let innovation grow and not put guardrails on inventions. AI is different. It's growing at such a fast pace. And when you talk about ethical issues, accountable issues, integrity issues, fiction issues, you've got to be able to bring guardrails and accountability. And that is where the legislatures are struggling. We've actually gone beyond this. We've gone into tokenization in financial services. And that's why the Genius Act is a good thing, because they now are trying to bring layers of legislation to try and provide limitations to those who are literally running ahead of themselves in terms of the technology boom. You can go from technology boom to technology bust. We need to be people need to be educated. And it goes on to another issue, and that's education. Just as China is educating its young in computer programming and AI from the age of 6, so too I think that we need in Britain and in other parts of the world to change the education syllabus so that we can bring in AI and the controls and ethical AI and all the ramifications at a very early age. I think we need to reskill the youth. One of the risks I see in AI at the moment is that AI will replace many of the menial jobs that the youth have today. We have to be aware of where AI is going, and we need to reskill the workforce to be able to cater for areas that AI are unable to cater for. Now, agentic is making it even more competitive in the job market. And I'm a great believer. I use agentic a lot. But I think we need to be very realistic, wearing my political hat on and wearing my business hat on, of how we can use AI as a force for good and do a risk matrix to try and de-risk some of the problems that AI can potentially face in the job market, in all sectors.
There is some people that argue now that you don't need to go to university because you can learn everything from online and use AI, maybe go do an apprenticeship in a company and become good at something. What's the value of university education?
That's a very good question. The value of education at university are those that you meet, your alumni, the opportunity, it's the discipline, it's the time of your life when you need to leave school and to specialize in areas of interest. University is not just about passing exams and getting degrees. Universities are a time that you make wonderful friends, you create ideas, you cross-pollinate, you meet people of all different backgrounds, you have an opportunity to grow and mature. That's why when I look back at my university, I was a professional student. I got lots and lots of degrees. Do I use my degrees? No, I don't use my degrees. Of course, I became a lawyer and did my master's in law. But I use university as an opportunity to make new friends, to have new experiences, to blossom. I would strongly recommend everyone, if they can afford it, to send their children to education. As I said this as a father of 4, and I have a stepdaughter as well. Very much in favour of university, and very much in favour, if you can afford it, having had a few years of apprenticeship, of working, to then go and do an MBA, because the alumni of the MBAs are incredible.
So network is the main gain.
Very important, very important. Your reputation is very important on your network. Your network relies on your integrity. Your integrity relies on reliability of your delivering on what you say you're going to deliver on. And therefore, I think it's all interconnected. Of course, there are in the businesses, there are farmers and there are hunters. There are those who seek business and those who farm business. That's the natural way the world gravitates. But what I'm very opposed to, and I've made my views clear, in the UK, the welfare state makes up almost 22% of our budget. The welfare state is made up of almost 5 million people who are on disability benefits. Many of those people are not disabled. They're cheating the system. I want to see people working. Margaret Thatcher was a great example of getting everyone to drive, work in whatever way they can. Obviously, I have sympathy with those who are seriously disabled. My heart runs out not just to those who are disabled, but to the parents to look after. It's important that they be looked after. But we need to take cumulative responsibility to work. Work is important for your mind, for your body, for your soul. And we used to be forging forward for a work culture. One of the things I love about the internet, what I love about AI, is you can have a digital nomad. You can have the best of both worlds. You can be sitting on a beach while running a business, but you've got to have that sense of purpose, and purpose is key to success.
Speaking of the continued working, do you think you'll ever retire?
No, I don't want to retire. I'll retire when I fall over, keel over. I think there's some people, I'd obviously like to spend more time improving on my golf. I love golf. I'd love to spend more time improving. I think when my grandchildren arrive, I want to spend more time with my grandchildren. I want to spend more time doing things in terms of risk mitigation, in terms of trying to bring about conflict resolution. But I think you've got to have purpose. That's vitally important. I give 15% of my time, so did my father, so did my mother, to charity, because I think we all have a duty of care to help those, the haves and the have-nots in being able to uplift their lives. It's not just about giving them money, it's about giving them support. So I support mostly charities in Africa. I support wildlife, I support education, I support healthcare, and I support taking people out of poverty.
Mm-hmm.
But that's only because I think we have a cumulative responsibility. Some people might say charity begins at home, but we've got to lead by example. And I really enjoy charitable work. So you talk about retirement. I think I respect a lot of people who retire and they give a lot of their time to charitable causes.
There is a saying, I think Tony Robbins says, the secret of living is giving.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And giving from the heart, not giving
Yes.
from the conscience.
So how do you distinguish whether you're giving from the heart or from the conscience?
Giving from the conscience goes into the whole subject of ESG. I'm in favor of sustainable development, but I'm not in favor of ESG as a tick box. I think ESG is important, but I think you have a sense, when you're working in a company, your sense of working for the company is not just to derive profits, but it's also put something back in society, making your company, making a contribution to a better society. So too in terms of charity. I don't want to feel that I need to give to Oxfam or to any charity because I look at some advertisement on the television and I say, oh, I feel so sorry for them, and I give them from, I want to give to charities that are well run. I want to give to charities that make a difference. I want to give to charities that are accountable and transparent. I want to give to charities that are doing things to manage their money, to manage their resource, and are accountable. Just as businesses are accountable, so too are charities accountable.
So it's about not being a tick box exercise as like ESG, but selecting charities that are transparent and that they'll execute the charity and not put it in someone's pockets in the chain.
Absolutely.
Right. So you spoke a lot about purpose, and you have got to have a mission statement and purpose, and clearly you've enjoyed the company of many people who are very purpose driven, like the Queen Elizabeth. How did you become the extra lord in waiting for the Queen, and what was that like?
Jack Witherall. Jack was the Lord Convener of the crossbenchers, and he approached me way back in the 1990s and said, we decided to create some additional lords in waiting. I didn't know what a lord in waiting's role was. And he said, we want you to be responsible particularly for meeting and greeting heads of state from Africa. And so I was invited to put my name forward, which I did in 1998. And I was elected. I was not elected, I was selected. It was one of the greatest honors, the greatest privileges, and the greatest amounts of fun to be representing Her Majesty. Her Majesty was the most remarkable lady. She was somebody who had so much humility, so much charm. She was just committed to her love and devotion for her country. She was a great family lady. She was just the most amazing person who you felt in awe to be in her company, just like in the company of Nelson Mandela.
Right.
But the one thing about her is that she was always thinking about other people. She had a passion for her horses. She had a passion for her family. She had a passion for her dogs. She had a passion for life. She was a true statesman. She was someone who had this incredible relationship with Nelson Mandela. She, I don't know whether you know, it's not known to put your arm or even touch a royal. So she was the only person who had the relationship with Mandela. She used to call him Nelson. She used to call her Elizabeth. They used to have this incredible accord between the two. But serving her was amazing. So you would get, for example, a brief from the palace. It would say, you will today be meeting Paul Kagame. Paul Kagame is the president of Rwanda. Paul Kagame's schedule is as follows. You should be aware of X. And you would see in many of these cases, many of these leaders were involved in very challenging times in their countries. In case of Paul's situation with President Museveni of Uganda, they had the Great Lakes massacre. So you'd be meeting some extraordinary people, but extraordinary luminaries. And you would meet them at the airport. They'd come off the plane, and your role would be the foreign secretary would be sending someone representing the foreign office, and you would shake hands with the president or the head of state, and you would say, on behalf of Her Majesty, may I welcome you to Britain. And you then walk them off the plane into the suite, the royal suite, where you would then talk through the program with them and greet them formally, and then you would put them into their car where they would then go off to the embassy or the hotel, and then you would accompany them when they leave the country as well. So it's a wonderful role to meet and greet heads of state. All of them, without exception, were in awe of Her Majesty. And many of the leaders who came had no idea what the role was of a lord in waiting. And they would almost feel that you were the Queen's equerry and that you were there to basically, you knew her on an infinite basis. And I used to sometimes take the mickey. I used to say, well, of course, the corgis aren't particularly well. And, you know, Her Majesty had a great win on the horses. Well, yeah, I was talking absolute nonsense, but I'd have a little bit of fun. I think you need to have a little bit of fun when you're doing a job like that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, you know, it was an honor. You're not paid for it. And I wanted to touch on that because I have been asked by many over your years, you've meted and you've greeted, built up extraordinary. How often have you profiteered from those relationships? I can say hand of heart that I'm 68 and I've not once benefited or tried to benefit from my position of privilege. I have held a very high rule of honor that it's been an honor and a privilege to serve with Her Majesty. It's been an honor and a privilege to serve in the House of Lords, but I have never used my parliamentary privilege to get rank and favor, to win a contract or to open doors. That's it. There's a strict divide between what I do in my public sector services and what I do wearing my private sector hat on. And that is important. It's very important. I think the problem in so many countries around the world, politicians have used their privilege to profiteer. And that should be absolutely wiped out. And I think that in the form of a future should be a motto of change. Unfortunately, it's not. And that's why the public have lost respect and lost a lot of faith in politicians. And I'm not saying any particular country, I'm saying globally, it's been a be no problem.
So if you look at Her Majesty's reign, it was rather challenging one in terms of all the events that took place for Britain in that time. Do you think Britain would still be a monarchy had it not been for Her Majesty?
Yes. I think Her Majesty did an incredible job. She served her country for over 60 years with great distinction. If she'd been serving for less time, would we still have a monarchy? Absolutely, we'd still have a monarchy. The monarchs lost their prerogative powers many generations ago. And what I mean by prerogative powers, their right to veto, their right to dictate. They are there in a persuasive capacity. They are there as the head of state, the head of the Commonwealth, the head to give leadership. But they give leadership by their presence rather than by persuasion. And here I come into talking about King Charles. King Charles is a deeply, deeply principled individual. He believes in interfaith. He believes in the environment. He believes very strongly about architecture, about biodiversity. He's a man hugely principled with extraordinary compassion and feelings. And he's had his challenges, his health challenges. He's had his challenges within the family. But I think that he has stood tall, and media can sometimes be quite damaging, can be sometimes quite critical. I stand firmly as someone who supports the fact that he is assertive on certain issues. Her Majesty wasn't assertive. It was her style. Her style was to be a statesman, not to be someone who held a line on certain issues. And the royals have gone through enormous challenges. The challenge of Andrew, the challenges of the Epstein files, the challenges of the divorces, the challenges we have, it's been fodder for the media. But the media have a relationship with the royal family where there are certain lines of accountability and there are certain lines of being able to stand back. And I think that relationship is being respected, and I hope that will endure. The royal family plays an incredibly important role, and long may it last.
Word. It seems that whenever there is a challenging diplomatic situation, if the queen hosted or the king hosts a state visit, it's like an additional way of soft power that you can use to influence the situation. I think it's an incredible resource.
Absolutely spot on. Soft power, very, very important. Politics is not just about winning votes. Politics is not about winning elections. Politics is about soft power, by gentle persuasion getting the end result. And I sincerely hope that we will see peace and reconciliation. Reconciliation, not necessarily, but we'll see peace between Russia and Ukraine. It's deeply worrying. It's been going on for far too long. We've had hundreds of thousands of deaths. We have families who've lost their loved ones, and they didn't really want to fight a war. And I think what we are seeing now is a different type of war. We're seeing wars with drones. And I think we've got to try and work now towards a world where we can collaborate rather than fight. And the fighting must end in Sudan. The fighting must end in all these troubled areas. But I won't get into battles because I'm not an expert on army. But I think that we have to look to cooperate. One area that I think we need to cooperate on is in space. Space is the next frontier. Here we are, act now or lose out. Space has got both the defense aspects and it's got the commercial aspects. The commercial aspects on providing broadband, providing observation for climate change, providing even solar farms in space, which can provide for renewable energy to serve power needs on Earth, even mining, even in pharmacology. There's so many areas that space can make a big, big difference. But I think that we need to see NASA, Chinese, and everyone coming together to work out solutions, because we are just a minnow. If you look up into space, it is absolutely fascinating to understand what is happening up there. And we're in the early stages of the revolution, where we'll have space tourism in a few years' time. It's extraordinary.
So is it driven by the fact that the launch cost has dropped and the satellites are tiny and they are so easy to launch now? What is that like some of the key drivings?
Well, I don't know what the figure is, but I think the figure was something like it would cost over $40,000 per kilogram to send to space. That cost is now down to less than $2,000 per kilogram. We now actually have a problem in space. We have space debris. We have too much satellites in space. We've got to work out a way in which we can also battery power. If you look at a satellite, say for a satellite the size of this table, the pay zone, which is basically the brain, is very small in terms of the satellite, because you've got the launch, you've got the battery. But I think now with solid fuel batteries, you can make the pay zone bigger and you can keep the battery smaller, and you can create satellites which won't fall out of the sky after 5 years, but satellites that can stay up there for 15, if not 20 years. Technology is moving, just as we had in the servers. I used to run data centers, the old-fashioned data centers. You used to have your racks with these huge data centers. Now you have blade servers. Now you have the new generation of data centers which are being powered by small modular nuclear reactors. That's another area we might talk about at some time.
There's a lot to talk about with you. So regarding space still, is it so that, or rather SpaceX, I think, has fundamentally changed the economics on the launches. Do you think it's also changed geopolitics around space?
I think the geopolitics of space will change by evolution.
Right.
I think that as we see Project Kuiper is the initiative of Jeff Bezos. He's going to be sending up lots more satellites. At the moment, Elon Musk controls the landscape. He is the majority shareholder in terms of the satellites up there. But as we launch more satellites, it become more competitive. We are going to be seeing the geopolitics of space changing. The Russians were very much at the forefront of space from the 1950s. The Russians are still involved in space. It goes into an issue at the moment about what are the Russians doing together with the Chinese, as they have a cozy relationship on what's happening in Ukraine. By the way, the Russians and the Chinese couldn't be more diverse partners. They are not naturally bed partners. They are quite the converse. I think the geopolitics of the world is going to change. As space changes, I think bed partners are going to change as well. And I'm hoping that the whole chessboard is going to rejig in time. But space is going to play a major role in that geopolitical mix. But as I said to you, businesses on Earth operate in pharmaceuticals, in engineering. Most businesses now in space have dual use. What I mean by dual use, they have a defense side, which is obviously very important, and they have a commercial side. That's a very interesting mix in businesses that are in space. But what I'm hoping is that governments are going to give more grants to SMEs to get more involved in the space economy. It's a little bit of a monopoly in space. We need to encourage with grants small and medium-sized enterprises to go and explore this new landscape, which is extraordinarily exciting.
Talking about geopolitics, you mentioned, and I think it's evident that China is playing the long game, and it seems like the US actions are more short-term oriented. What do you make of that?
You're absolutely right about that. I did my master's in Chinese law in 1982. I went to live in China in 1983. When I went to China, I went to Beijing and Shanghai and Guangzhou, Guilin. Everyone's running around in their Mao suits. There were no motor cars. Everyone's running around in bicycles. Russia was obviously a military power. China was a minnow, despite its large numbers. When I went back 10 or 15 years later, China had changed beyond recognition. And I think now we're seeing a situation where the Cold War is over. We have a new type of war. We have a digital war. We have a war where there's a lot of codependence. Whereas we have trade wars, the US is very dependent on sourcing products from China. China is very dependent on getting the market from the US. It is interdependent, but it is dependent. It is a situation where I think there's got to be a lot more focus on the long game rather than the short game. And this is where I suppose I am a little bit cautious about supporting some of Trump's policies, because I think I said earlier on, Trump is about short-term gain and I think longer-term pain. The Chinese game in a chessboard is they're looking at 4 or 5 moves ahead in the chess game before they're getting to checkmate. There should be no winners, there should be no losers. There should be areas where they can both work together in a codependent and in an accountable fashion. So I think that China will emerge as the superpower in many areas, but the Chinese have managed to control the rare earth market. They've managed to control the solar market. They're managing to control many markets, which the Americans are now waking up to. I do find it, I have to admit, a little bit alarming that the Trump administration have put a pause in implementing the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in Africa. The Chinese, we well know, have been on a bit of a land grab in Africa, and they've been, unfortunately, getting involved in a lot of corrupt practices, and they should be held to account. But Africa needs beneficiation. Africa doesn't need America or China to take all the minerals. Africa needs job creation. When minerals are taken out of the ground, they need to beneficiate, to create jobs, to create livelihoods. Yes, to get the rare earths out is very important, but they should be doing the beneficiation in Africa rather than the beneficiation in China and elsewhere in the world. So that's another issue we can talk about at some later stage. But right now, yes, you're right. China plays the long game. America is taking a shorter term view. Do I think that China will take over Taiwan? No. Not militarily. I think they will eventually try and strike a deal where Taiwan will be part of China. But let's not get into that. I don't have a silver bullet. I have no idea at all. I just think that China wins wars not by fighting, but by their own way of, they win wars without bullets. Whereas they're building this huge arsenal of power, I don't think it's the tactic of the Chinese to push the button to destruct, because if they destroy, they'll be destroyed themselves. And that can go into a much deeper conversation about nuclear proliferation as in armaments. My interest in nuclear is in nuclear power, clean energy, not
Can I ask
nuclear
about,
warheads.
in a moment, that would be a very fascinating topic. The governments increasingly, like I think UK is increasing the defense spend from 2 to 4% of GDP, and many countries follow suit in Europe. I mean, layman's thinking, does this mean that everyone's building rockets and weapons and arming up? Are they going to be used sometime in the near future?
I don't believe so. No. I'm at odds with some of my colleagues who think we will have a third world war. Some even say we're in a third world war at the moment. I think that it's important to have proper defenses, to have a defense strategy. I think it's important. I think NATO is an important force. I think defense strategy is not necessarily about strategizing to win a battle. I think defense strategy is a battle to have your armaments and your defenses in place to protect yourselves. You can do the same thing about a data center. The data centers are very important to power AI, but data centers don't just rely on electricity. The infrastructure they require on cooling, they require redundancy, they require fiber. So too in terms of a defense force. Defense force requires training up your personnel, getting your armaments in place, being up to date with mitigation of defense, getting up to speed with cybersecurity, getting up to speed about all the potential risks, doing a full risk matrix. It's like running a business. You've got to have all the strategy in place. And unfortunately, there's been an over-dependence on NATO, an over-dependence on others to do the dirty work. And that's why, in a way, I do have sympathy with President Trump in his policy of saying, you guys have got to look after yourselves. You can't always look at us to defend you. We are looking after ourselves in America, and we're not the guardians of peace for the rest of the world.
So in addition to soft power, you got to have a credible threat of hard power.
Yes, just like you have nuclear proliferation, nuclear arms, as I said before. I'm not an expert in arms, but I think if you know that the country that you're about to attack has got an arsenal of nuclear weapons, you're unlikely to attack that country because you know you're going to get wiped out. So, countries that don't have their own defense are vulnerable to being bullied by those that do have these nasty weapons.
So we've got over 20 countries that have committed to triple the nuclear capacity by 2050. Why is uranium in such epicenter again?
Well, you can talk about, the nuclear power is the cleanest, long-term the cheapest, and the most reliable form of power. Now you can say, well, you can get power from thorium, but we're a long way away from thorium. For enrichment purposes, the most reliable source of power remains nuclear power. Now there have been obviously nuclear disasters in Japan, in Russia, but I think the sophistication of the technology now, in terms of enrichment, in terms of the nuclear facilities, are that you look at what's been happening in France. The grid in France is possibly one of the most resilient grids in Europe. It's based on nuclear power. Now, do I believe that renewables are going to be able to fill the vacuum? No, I don't. I think in terms of the energy mix, nuclear basically should be the nucleus of energy, but I think renewables will struggle to get above 5%. There shouldn't be an over-reliance on renewables. I'm important to promote renewables, but I think in terms of reliability, it's difficult to beat nuclear. Of course, you have fusion, you have all different types of energies for the future, but I think nuclear power and uranium, and of course, uranium price has been very depressed over the last couple of years. And that's been a reason why many of the producers have not been producing uranium. So the biggest producers of uranium are countries like Kazakhstan, like Niger, it's parts of the world, Namibia. These are the countries that are producing uranium, Australia. I think we need to be looking very carefully at the moment about where the whole nuclear mix is going. Germany was against nuclear power. Now they're in favor of nuclear power. I think in terms of a utility, it's the way to go in the future. And there's a general acceptance that it's clean power. It ticks all the boxes.
So do you think there's possibility to become into long-term uranium shortage as so many people are ramping up the production of the power plants?
Of course, of course. Do I think uranium price will be a lot higher at the end of next year than it is today? Yes, I do. But we'll have to see. There are new uranium mines as the price goes up. Obviously, the new mines come into production. So on the supply-demand curve, at the moment, there's a shortage of uranium, but if the price goes up enough, it'll become commercially viable for some countries to produce more uranium. And obviously, as in all commodities, it's on supply and demand.
Does Africa have plentiful uranium resources?
No. Africa has uranium, and there are a number of areas that they're looking at uranium, but uranium is more, in Eastern Europe and in Canada and in other parts of the world where there are large uranium resources. Uzbekistan has got uranium. There's a lot of uranium being found, but I think at the moment it's very much price sensitive. So I, for example, chair uranium business. I chair a company called Yellowcake. We don't mine uranium. We hold uranium. There are other companies that hold uranium. So we're almost like an index of uranium.
Right.
If you want to buy uranium and you think it's going up, then you buy our stock. That's how it basically works.
You're also involved with stablecoins.
Yes, I do. I think I'm not involved with stablecoins. I'm involved with tokenization. There's a large amount of the world that are unbanked. A large amount of the world are looking at other forms of assets that they can trade. And if you look at trade in the past, you used to have barter trade. I'll swap my oranges for your apples, or I'll swap my gold for your whatever. Obviously, with currencies as they are at the moment, the banks have been able to hold most of the pieces on the monopoly set. But now I think with Bitcoin and the whole virtual asset market exploding, not exploding in growing, it's brought in necessity to bring in checks and balances. We talked about the Genius Act, but there's also checks and balances in terms of stablecoins. The one thing about stablecoin, obviously, is that it is pegged to the US dollar. So you've got to make sure that those who are promoting stablecoins have sufficient collateral to back up their stable coin. But I think this is all part and parcel of the evolution of the financial services market. And I welcome the growth in virtual assets, but I would like to see virtual assets being asset backed. I'd like to see virtual assets being, in terms of Bitcoin, others being regulated. I want to see there being accountability. A lot of the time, there have been concerns that those who are using these digital assets are doing so in order to avoid sanctions, in order to do so without complying with KYC and money laundering. We need to have those checks and balances in place to bring respectability, to bring trust, and to get the, as it were, the more spurious players out of the market and grow it for what is needed. The world needs other forms of currency, and I think tokenization plays a very important role.
I think Tether is the most influential stablecoin, possibly also, some say, most controversial. What explains its dominance?
I don't think that's very controversial. I think Tether have grown a very good reputation, and they've shown themselves to be being very much in favor of legislation to control the bad players out there. And I think they have been diversifying their portfolio. They were buying a lot of treasury, as you will be read in the papers. They're now buying a lot of gold. And they're looking to diversify their portfolio so that they are purpose-driven. It's not just about a matter of making profit. I think purpose-driven is important because they're looking to invest into areas of the market that can add value. So I think Tether is a force for good. There are many of those that are looking to discredit those who have done well, and Tether have certainly been. Tether, as Circle, and others have done extremely, extremely well. But they shouldn't be seen in a negative light. They do have, it's just like we talked about ESG earlier on. They do have a purpose-driven, real desire to be a force for good. And I think from what we're seeing right now, they're embracing regulation rather than running away from regulation. And that, I think, is why we're seeing, a bit more respectability coming into markets.
Earlier you shared a few of the times in your life that's been really, really difficult, and yet you've thrived through, fought back, I think you said. What would be your advice for if there's anyone watching or listening ever that is in that dark place? What to do to not fall but continue forward to victory?
I think there's I shared a story. I think always sharing an anecdote is quite a good way of explaining. I went a few years ago to Founders Forum, which happens in Soho Farmhouse every year in June, and run by Brent Hoberman. And there were 3 tents. There was one tent on AI, there was one tent on quantum computing, one tent on longevity. And out of curiosity, I went to the longevity tent. Yes, I was in my late 60s and I wanted to find out, what can be done to improve your health. And I went in, and there were these doctors saying, if you can live to 2030, 2035, you can freeze your age. And like a naughty little schoolboy, when it came to questions and answers, I put up my arm and I said, I've seen the film The Curious Life of Benjamin Button, but that's just fiction. You can't realist. When your time is up, your time is up. And they said, no, there's so much going on in medicine right now which can really gravitate towards prevention rather than cure. We have the GLP-1s, we have the GSK-9s, we have all these new innovations, and you should be looking at reducing stress levels. Now, when I bring it down to myself, I decided to be a dummy. So, I said to you right at the start of the interview that only 4 of my 22 previous Lord St. lived beyond the age of 59. And so I took that into my own hands, and I have faced adversity by being hit by a car, but I would never have known, for example, that I had a problem with cancer unless I'd had a CT scan. I'd never have known that I'd been proactive. And my advice to others is never take your life for granted. Always be prepared to adapt. Always be prepared to learn. Always be prepared to go for that extra check. Always do what you can to reduce your stress. Always do what you do to exercise, to sleep well. And I have fortunately allowed others with a panel of great doctors to use me as a human dummy to try and say, test everything out. I have another thing I suffer from. I suffer from an ailment called peripheral neuropathy. I'm in constant pain in my feet, pins and needles. When I walk barefoot, it feels like I'm working on burning coal. But you've got to just rid these things. You've got to look at the positives. You've got to overcome adversity by being positive. So my advice is to stay positive, to have a sense of purpose, as we spoke earlier on. Just always look to move forward, and negativity drives other negativity. And I've had lots of reasons. I've got to learn lessons. If I do my risk matrix, I do a SWOT of myself. My biggest weakness is that I've trusted too many people. I've trusted people blindly and invested my money and lost everything. I have lost more money than I've made because of belief in other people. I've learned not to trust people. I think it's important that when you invest in the quality of management rather than investing in the story. My father once gave me some very good advice. He said, my son, there's two things you should do. If you want to bet on the horses, never bet on the horse. Always bet on the jockey, because a good jockey won't ride a bad horse. And if the diffman says, I'll have some of these, governor, good stock, you'll make a lot of money, never bet on the story, bet on the management. And that's a story of life, which I have had to learn, which I instill in my children. Learn by example. Learn from people who have track record. Learn from people who have integrity. Learn from people who have the sense of purpose. I've unfortunately been impetuous, and that has unfortunately paid its toll on me. But in terms of health, I now am taking it scrolling by the scruff of the neck and making sure that I make all the checks to get myself better.
Anthony, I appreciate the heck you being here. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Great pleasure. Thank you.
Well done.